Welcome to our podcast, Ronald De Bruin, and I've read your book. It's really interesting. It's called The Brussels Da Vinci Code. It reminds me a lot of my early work in Secrets in Plain Sight, in that you're looking at patterns in cities and in architecture, and you've come up with a whole panoply of really interesting correlations, to a lot of them to ancient Egypt, and to astronomy as well. I'm really excited to ask you a bunch of questions today. And I wanted you to give you a chance to introduce yourself and tell us what you do in your daily life.
Well, thanks, Scott and Geoff, for inviting me, first of all. And it's a real opportunity to, broaden, let's say, a little bit the the story to a worldwide forum. Because indeed, in my daily life, I'm heading an intergovernmental organization in science and technology based in Brussels. And we have an organization with more than 43 countries that are member. So it's really my daily life to make sure that science and technology are advanced. But here we're talking about, let's say, a passion of mine that started when I visited the Nile, let's say, Delta. We went on an excursion with a small group, and the idea was to go visit temples and other sites in the area of Luxor. And then one of my traveling companions told me, well, did you know that the pyramids along the River Nile are positioned in a way that they mimic the stars in the cosmos? And that somehow stuck to me, and I started to ask questions, and then I was referred to some reading. And after the reading, I basically understood that, but this is not unique to ancient Egypt with its pyramids. It's also something that is already manifesting in other parts of the world, in Maya Tikal, for example, or Göbekli Tepe, or in Asia, and not only limited to, let's say, the era of the ancient Egyptian monoliths, but also in the monolithical, let's say, time frame worldwide. And it didn't stop there, because I understood that it is also the case that in more modern cities, or more recent cities, I should say, the same kind of principles were observed. The alignment of architecture with stars and with geometry in them. So I learned about Rome. I learned about also a star map, let's say, encoded in Paris, not that far away from Brussels. Washington, D.C., of course. So I started myself the question, what about Brussels? In my pure curiosity. And that's where it all started, Scott.
That's great. And I want to ask you more specifically about some of the things that you have discovered in Brussels. And one of the things that jumps out to me is the tree of life pattern that you've identified in the Brussels Park and in the Parc de Cinquantenaire. And I recognize this in the diagrams in your book, like in the redesign of London from the fire of 1666. I think it was Sir Christopher Wren had a plan for the rebuilding of London that involved the Tree of Life. This is the Kabbalistic pattern of the Tree of Life from Judaism, encoded in the streets. And can you tell us more about how you discovered this pattern in Brussels, and what does that mean to you?
Well, actually, it goes back to, I think, 2 weeks before I went on that trip to Egypt in 2019, where I visited the Louvre Museum in Paris with my family. And I wanted to see the Sumerian collection. And the Sumerian civilization was discovered very recently, actually, I think the end of the 19th century. And we know now that it predated, at least as far as we know, the ancient Egyptian civilization, and then starts to run in parallel. So while walking around, let's say, in the corridors, looking at those artifacts, I suddenly saw something that caught my eye. There was a floor panel dated 645 BC from Iraq. So that's where Sumeria used to be located. And there were these circles that looked a bit like circles within circles intertwined. And I was, let's say, a little bit puzzled initially, but I thought it was interesting, and I took a picture of it. And what happened is that when I was in Egypt, in the ancient city of Abydos, that behind the temple of Seti I, there is an older temple called the Osirian. It was roughly 3,000 years old. And my travel guide suddenly started pointing at one of those huge granite pillars. And I looked very closely, and then I saw three, let's say, circles. And within those circles, I saw the same pattern, circles within circles. And then he said, that's the flower of life. So, okay, that's interesting. I saw something similar in Paris, in the Louvre. So, and that comes from Sumeria. So there must be a connection. And then I actually realized that this flower of life geometry is used as an underlying geometry for the tree of life, which is basically a subset of these circles. So the tree of life, in short, has 10 circles. In Hebrew, they're called sephirot. And this geometry is used in ancient Jewish mysticism to contemplate on the 10 divine manifestations of God, right? So then it started to become suddenly something that had meaning and context. And this tradition was also infused, particularly in the Middle Ages, just before the Renaissance and during the Renaissance, into the philosophical, let's say, contemplations in Western Europe. And so I looked at this geometry, and then I started at the same time staring at the map of Brussels. And I noticed that there was an underlying design, that the design of the Parc du Cinquantenaire, it's in French, a park that commemorates the 50th anniversary of the Belgian state that was established in 1831. And I said, look, I see this tree of life as an underlying, let's say, geometrical pattern. And I came with my finding to the travel guide, who I know very well, that we had in Egypt. And then he said, look what I found. And he was pointing at another park. And this is the Central Park of Brussels that was established in the late 1800s, so earlier than that, with the same underlying pattern. So we had both, not talking about this with one another, discovered the same underlying pattern in two different parks in Brussels. So you can imagine that actually rang a bell and was really arousing my curiosity. And indeed, as you say, Scott, later I also read about the Great Fire in London in 1666, where the center was basically made out of wood, wooden houses, was completely destroyed. And the idea was to redo it, and with an orderly design. And the designs that you can see on the drawing board indeed reveal that the street patterns show this geometry. But because they were in haste and houses needed to be built quickly, they couldn't wait for these ground projects. It was only partially constructed. But nevertheless, you see that the same philosophy was used in the same, a bit earlier than that, in the same period of time, more or less. So you see that, it's not coincidence.
Exactly. Yeah,
it's amazing. To take away.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of the Orion Mystery by Robert Bauval, in which he showed the correlation between the three pyramids of Giza and the belt stars of the Orion constellation, and how they're laid out in a similar way. And this is echoed in like the three magi story, and in a lot of ways it is. And you discovered the Orion constellation encoded in the street plan of Brussels. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And the starting point for that was that I saw an axis in the shape of a big cross, where the long, let's say, axis was made out of an alignment of a very big church called the Kugelberg Basilique. It's the 5th biggest church in the world, actually, in the distance. And then a bit closer, the town hall town, which is a medieval, let's say, architecture with the archangel Saint Michael on top. And then closer, I was standing in another small church, a chapel that was built in the 12th century, dedicated to Saint Jacques de Compostela. And that is, exactly in one alignment. And then exactly at the crossing point, there was a road, going to other, let's say, landmarks. So I observed a very big cross over the city. Now, we also know that the constellation of Orion, at least the most important stars, form a cross. So you have the three belt stars, but also at the far ends, you have a star called Betelgeuse and the other star called Orion. And that forms a cross. So I was looking at could it possibly be that I find something similar as done with the three ancient pyramids in Giza? And we don't have pyramids in Brussels. So I started to experiment a little bit, and then I noticed that there was a square with an equestrian statue of one of the Belgian kings. And this square had, a kind of a star-like pattern.
Is that's the square that has the 5x5 grid, like the Sator magic square? Is that the right one?
That's not the right one. That is another one that represents the Pleiades, which is part of the Taurus constellation. But looking at, let's say, the cross of Orion, I was first trying to see where are possibly those three belt stars positioned. And I recall the importance of Robert Bauval's finding, and I have watched also his, let's say, his story behind it, that suddenly he noticed that these three pyramids are not in a straight line. There's offset. I had to find then another point, what could possibly represent the star, and I came to a square, let's say, just outside this church dedicated to Saint Jacques, with again an equestrian statue of, in this case, Godfrey of Bouillon, who was a Crusader knight, who became the ruler of Jerusalem, not the king, but the protector of the Holy St. Perkel Church, in a newly established kingdom of Jerusalem. And then I had 2 points. So if you look at the belt stars, they have a particular offset, indeed, but also the distance has to be in correspondence with the reality. So I took basically a picture, taken my telescope, I overlaid it on the map. Where would this other one land then? And it landed just on the old perimeter of the city wall. And I go over there, and what do I see? Another king on a horse, King Leopold II. And this square is also designed with an underlying star geometry. So I have now 3 distinct points with 3 distinct centers with star-shaped, let's say, squares, and 3 kings. Well, you mentioned it, Scott. The 3 magi from the east, or the 3 belt stars of Orion, are also referred to as the 3 kings. So yeah, then it became really exciting. So this was the big revelation for me, that indeed there is a star map also encoded, apart from the 3 kings.
And the Orion constellation was correlated with Osiris in ancient Egypt. And if you follow the belt stars roughly in one direction, they go towards the star Sirius, which was correlated with Isis in ancient Egypt. And in Giza, if you follow those belt star, the 3 pyramids, they point to ancient Heliopolis, which would have represented Sirius. And in Brussels, if you follow these belt stars out, they point to the Kokelberg Basilica of the Sacred Heart, which represents Sirius. And it's a long distance to this place, just as it is sort of a long distance in the heavens from the belt stars of Orion to Sirius. And so you have this longer scale thing going on even in the street pattern, right?
Yeah, that's right. Because the, let's say, the star map is encoded by means of architecture that is located in specific distances or proportions of distances And when taking a closer look at this basilica, which is indeed dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, I noticed that running away from the cathedral, or sorry, it is a basilica, I have to be very precise here. There's a big boulevard, and the whole ring road in the city center follows the old city wall perimeter. But there on the northern part, it is chopped off, like you chop off, the upper part of an egg to start spooning out your breakfast. So that was quite interesting to note, and I then took the experiments and look, as above, so below. I started to think about, well, could it also be that this basilica is aligned in the direction of this boulevard with the spot where Sirius crosses the horizon? And so I went there, went to the portico, I took my camera, I took a shot, and I used a planetarium to basically calculate. And the thing about science is, of course, that you show how to do it. You have the facts, you show how to do it. And then everybody who reproduces the experiment should come to the same result. So I've done that in the book. So you just have to assume for the moment, not having read the book, that indeed it is aligned. And why is this so important? Because there was one specific moment in the year that the star of Sirius was gone for a period of 70 days. And the moment that the star was visible when rising for the first time, that means that the sun is low enough, so it is dark enough, then the Egyptians knew that the annual flooding of the Nile would start. So the star Sirius and the river Nile have a connection. So the ancient expression was, the river Nile are the tears from Isis. And Osiris was considered to be the fruitile, let's say, sediment that would settle on the riverbanks. So the seeds could be planted, and then the whole annual cycle, of life and death would repeat itself.
Mm.
And this particular date, when this happens in our part, let's say, of the world, in Europe, is on the 15th of August. That's the date where we celebrate Ascension of Maria. Now, Maria is, of course, the successor, as we all can safely assume, of Isis. And Isis was linked to Sirius. So the 15th of August actually commemorates, the heliacal rising, the sunrise of the star Sirius, as the ancient Egyptians did.
And so the axis of this cathedral stretches, or the Basilica of the Sacred Heart is what it is. That central axis extends into this big avenue of Boulevard Leopold II, and that's aligned with the heliacal rising of Sirius. And that is, you see that same thing happen in the Axe Historique in Paris. It's aligned in the same way. And so is Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. And I mean, isn't these avenues of power are all aligned to this ancient Egyptian calendar? And I don't think people really are aware of that. It's fascinating when you're drawn to these mysteries, and you have to pull out like stellarium, this very scientific astronomical simulation that will predict it. But then you actually go to the site and take a picture on the panorama deck on top of this basilica, and you can see the where Sirius appears at the end of the boulevard is framed by these two towers on either side. And to me, it's very, very kind of Masonic, in the sense it's like Boaz and Jachin, or perhaps it's like the columns in the Tree of Life, But I think what all of these things represent is the human energy, the human body, ultimately, somehow. They're correlated.
Can I jump in, Jens, and say hello, first of all?
Yeah.
I'm enjoying, I feel like I'm at the movies here, listening to you two experts, and it's quite remarkable that your work, Scott, you know, mirrors in many ways Ronald's work. You know, I mean, you two guys are really leading edge when it comes to alignments in cityscapes, you know, and it's you know, it's not an area of expertise for me, so I just want to commend you both for the great work you're doing there. And one of the lovely things is just to say to our listeners and our viewers, the way we came across Ronald was through our academy, you know, and we have we were trying to sort of connect with people that share the same passion as Scott and I for sacred geometry. And, you know, here's an example of, like, you know, a random guy we met on the internet, you know, who happens to share a passion for sacred geometry. And not only that, has written a book, and a detailed book, about these geometric alignments, in this case in Brussels, you know. But I wanted to just jump in here on the heliacal rising of Sirius, as if a difficult word to pronounce. Heliacal, how do you say that?
I think people say it in different ways. I say heliacal, and Ronald, how do you say it?
Yeah, I also heard heliacal, but to make it simple, it's a sunrise of Sirius.
But if I understand it correctly, say, to go back to the Great Pyramid, and I should credit Jonathan Quinton with this, because he said it so beautifully, that I believe, if this is how it works, is that there's only one day in the year, just like you were saying, Ronald, where the star Sirius rises before the sun. So the sky is still really dark. And as the star Sirius rises, you know, above the horizon, it shines this kind of like very, very beautiful, almost pink light across the Giza Plateau. And I hope I'm right in this, but I believe it rises to a certain altitude in the sky where it's just perfectly positioned to shine into the Queen's chamber, I think. I think it shines, or maybe it's the King's chamber, but there's a corridor that's cut all the way through the pyramid, right? That takes the light beam of Sirius right the way into one of the central chambers. Forgive me now, I think it's the Queen's chamber, but I can't be certain about that. So, but just the principle, if I'm correct, is so outstanding if this is what happens.
Geoff, this is a slightly different thing but you're right. It is Sirius, but it's the culmination or the highest point that it gets in the sky. And this is Robert Bivall's research on these shafts that were cut. And I think it's into the King's chamber, but it doesn't really matter. There's a shaft that's cut at a very specific angle, and it correlates with the culmination or highest point of Sirius. Now, the heliacal rising is different. It's when the star rises on the horizon just before the dawn, because when the sun actually comes up, it's so bright that it drowns out all the stars.
Of course, yeah. Okay. So that, I'm getting my serious movements a little bit muddled then. But I was just, by the way, can we just take a moment on the majesty of that? So if this particular star is being caught by a structure that has, what is it, 1,300,000 stone blocks all put together, and then somebody like incised a corridor through that block to capture what? This one star in the sky, wouldn't it make you feel, hey, maybe this star is worth paying attention to? Okay.
Well, it is the brightest. It is the brightest star in the sky after the sun.
Okay.
So it's really hard to miss, you know.
Yeah. But doesn't it lead you to think that there's perhaps something more to it as well? Like why would the ancients have been so interested in, like, I know it's the brightest star, and that's obviously would have piqued their interest. But can I just go back to what you mentioned, Ronald, is there's a basilica in Brussels and there's a long avenue that rolls out in front of it. Is that correct? And is that long avenue then, does that capture the rising of the sun, the rising of Sirius on that very special day, the 15th of August?
Correct.
It's lined up to catch that. And is that the same, Scott, as you mentioned Pennsylvania Avenue? Where's Pennsylvania Avenue actually?
It's looking from the White House towards the Capitol.
Oh, it's in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Forgive me about my American geography. Okay, so that's another major avenue and is that again the exact same thing, Scott? It captures the rising.
It is also aligned to the same phenomenon, the heliacal rising of Sirius.
And the axis historique, is that the really cool one that runs all the way through Paris, like from the Arc de Triomphe, the Carousel, all the way down to the Tesseract to the Grand Arch?
Yeah,
Correct.
look, you'd stand on the Grand Arch looking
The other way.
towards the Louvre Pyramid.
Okay, so
And
like they're three pretty major cities, yeah, and the you know, so okay, so let's just tick in the plot here a bit, okay? That's a thing, right? That's a thing that you can prove. It's self-evident. I mean, if people want to go out planetariums and stuff, I haven't done it, but I trust you guys. You know, I'm pretty sure if it's good enough for you, it's good enough for me. Now, what is going on, right? Did all these architects get together and have kind of a secret meeting and say, okay, I'll tell you what, you're going to look after Brussels, Ronald. I'll take care of Paris. Will you do Washington, D.C., Scott? And we're going to do all the buildings, all the planning, all the organization, all of the arrangements so that our main avenues, our thoroughfares capture. I mean, not all main avenues, but that there's significant major feats of architecture to capture this. Like how do you put meaning over that? What's going on? Is it is it a intentional man-made thing? Is it something else more
I think
bizarre
there
and
is
deep?
definitely a Freemasonic connection to these, a lot of these elements. And I think that when you understand the esoteric aspects of these things, it's very tempting to want to encode them in the things that you build. What do you think, Ronald?
Well, first of all, what was quite striking to me is that I only found out about the alignment of the Axe Historique in Paris with the star Sirius, I think just a few weeks ago. And I wrote the book completely independently. I didn't know about Pennsylvania Avenue. I wrote the book, but I only saw Scott's fantastic, let's say, compilation of all these cities much later. So that already is quite striking, at least for me personally. Brussels is very close to Paris. If you look at the global scale, if you take the high-speed train, it's a 1.5 hour train ride. So the moment that I learned about this alignment, of course, I went to Google Maps and I took the two maps of the streets. Yeah, they run in parallel. It's clear. They're aligned in exactly the same direction. I think Pennsylvania Avenue may have a slight...
they are slightly different because they're at different latitudes and the atmospheric phenomenon are slightly different. There's a really complicated calculator you can use to predict the heliacal rising of Sirius, but it takes a lot of different factors into account. It's not just a simple azimuth from north. There's elevation above sea level, there's atmospheric phenomenon, there's the stellar alignment, and they all have to come together for that to happen.
Yeah, and light pollution as we have nowadays, which is very different, of course, from people who roamed this earth in the Neolithics. I mean, can you imagine if you go to the desert nowadays and it's dark and you look at the sky, I mean, you see things. It's awesome. We don't see.
In your book, you also talk about another phenomenon that I'd never considered, which is the heliacal rising of the belt stars of Orion. And maybe you can tell us more about where you found that in Brussels and what that represents. And it's not just a random thing, but it seems very, very significant to me, the architectural monument that you found, that where this phenomenon occurs.
First of all, Geoff, I haven't forgotten the question that you haven't answered yet, but I'll come back to that later. Who done it? Was it a plot? But
thank you, Ronald.
In all seriousness, because when I found these let's say monuments that would mimic the stars of Orion, the belt stars of Orion, and I found the alignment of the Basilica with the actual cosmic phenomenon of a rising star of Sirius, then I started to see, is there any other cosmic alignment, on the horizon? And indeed, I found this. But To explain that, I'll first go to Washington for a second, because in Washington, we all know that we have this Grand Mall with this huge obelisk. And the alignment of the mall is due east. And there is one moment in the year where the belt stars of Orion start to rise. And the first of the three, it's named Mintaka, is rising just before sunrise, so it becomes visible for the first time. Guess what? On the 4th of July, Independence Day. Okay, so Belgium is a young country. It was established after the defeat of Napoleon and then a 15-year period of the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. There was a small revolt. Belgium became independent, and we talk about 1831. And Belgium is located between the UK, France, Germany, really, you know, the power, let's say the big powers, in addition to Russia, in Europe. And Belgium is exactly in the middle. So we often talk about, maintaining the balance of power to maintain peace. So Belgium was created then as a kind of a buffer state. So how was this politically reconciled? There was, in the end, a king from the UK, King Leopold, who was married to the successor on the throne, but she died, and he never became king in the UK. He was offered the throne in Greece, but he refused because it was too unstable. And there was his opportunity. But he had to be reconciled by marrying the daughter of the French king, Louise Marie. So the whole idea was that he would be, let's say, sworn in on a new constitution that was written before that by a big national congress. And the constitution needed to be finished so that he could swear his loyalty or allegiance to the constitution, hence a constitutional monarchy. So he was sworn in on the 21st of July, 1831. And guess what? That is the date of the heliacal rising of Orion. So it's the Belgian Independence Day. And there is a nice
fascinating
pillar monument in Brussels that shows the alignment. And I've described it in my book in exactly the same way as I did with the Basilica. And then his son built a huge monument. It's a tripartite arcade in the Parc du Cinquantenaire, so one of these two parks with the Tree of Life design.
It's like a Roman triumphal arch with three parts, isn't that right?
Yeah, it's like the Arc de Triomphe, but then with two smaller arcs on the side.
Yeah.
And you see Orion rising, exactly through the middle arch, So it's really astonishing if you look at it like that, and then you start to see a pattern. You start to see the people behind it. And there are too many components, mathematically speaking. There are so many components in this star map that the chance of coincidence is zilch, right? So, so that is I think really amazing about the design of Brussels that took place since it became independent, and it lasted until the early, let's say, 20th century, so 1907 or so. And throughout this whole period, all these different pieces were, created, and that's fascinating.
So, Ronald, I have a question about the location of this triumphal arch or arcade in the park. You've identified a Tree of Life in this park, and so where does this archway fit within that pattern?
Well, this middle arch correlates with a circle or sephiroth that is called Daat. And actually, it's not a sephiroth. It's a kind of a black hole, so to speak. The idea behind it is that you become aware of it by the virtue of obtaining, let's say, a higher knowledge. And only if you have this higher level of consciousness, you can see it, and then also access, let's say, the higher sephiroths on the tree. So you climb in the tree, so to speak, and in the top, it's really the most sublime, let's say, manifestations of the divine. So it's a kind of a gateway. I give it away actually already, because there is this huge gate. And through the gate, you can see the 3 belt stars of Orion rising. And this relates to the ancient Osiris myth, where Osiris was ruling the netherworld. So after a pharaoh would decease, he would be taken to the last judgment. He would be taken by the hand, as we know from the Dead Scrolls, or the Book of the Dead, I have to say, has to be very precise, that are part of ancient Egyptian stellar religion. And he was taken by the hand by Anubis to a weighing scale. And this weighing scale was put in place by the goddess of Ma'at. Ma'at has a feather on her head. She is the cosmic goddess of law and order. And the idea was to see if the judgment would be favorable or not. So if the pharaoh would have had a good life, his heart was put on one end of the weighing scale and the feather of Ma'at on the other scale. If he had a good life, then it would be at par. But if not, if the heart would be heavy, the weighing scale will tilt, and then the consequence of that is that the heart of the pharaoh got eaten alive by a monster called Amit. It was a compilation of a crocodile, a lion, and a hippo. It's very awful. And then you could basically consider your soul to be destroyed forever. So very dramatic. But if it was at par, it's good. And then also another god in the Egyptian pantheon will give his blessing and record everything. That's Thoth, the god of wisdom and scribe. And then the pharaoh, the deceased pharaoh, will be taken by the hand by the god Horus. He is the son of Osiris and Isis. And he would lead, let's say, the pharaoh then to his father, Osiris, who would then basically make the conclusion and the verdict complete. And that would allow the pharaoh to reach eternal life. And the way this eternal life was accessed is that the soul of the pharaoh would elevate or ascend or climb on a ladder, what you like, to a place in the cosmos called the Duat. And the Duat is an area where the constellation of Orion is positioned together with Sirius, by the way. And this Orion constellation would act as the gateway to reach the polar stars. And the polar stars never rise and never set. They're always there. And that means that the pharaoh, in its internal life, will become a star in the polar region, never dies. And that is the eternal life. So in that sense, you see these alignments, you see the, let's say, the positioning in the tree of life, where it exactly correlates with the gateway, but also in the ancient Egyptian stellar religion, this gateway has a meaning.
I also see another layer here with the position of Doth in the tree of life, in that there are 10 Sephiroth, not including Doth because it's hidden, and there are 22 paths connecting the Sephiroth, and that adds up to 32 elements. And then when Doth is revealed, it becomes the 33rd and final element. And so this tension between 32 and 33 is echoed in the Scottish Rite, for example, and in many other phenomena. I've given a lecture that I think you attended, Ronald, in our live membership, where I went really deeply into this tension between 32 and 33. But I find that especially gratifying to see that this archway is in that location of this 33rd element, this last step that completes the hero's journey, if you will, and it acts as the kind of stargate for the soul to move on to the next level. And it's very beautiful when you think about how all of this is encoded in the streets and civic monuments in Brussels. And it's like a classic secret in plain sight. It's there for those who have eyes to see, to decode the pattern. It's available to everyone. And I find that really uplifting in a way that you have decoded the city for us, and now we get to enjoy the fruit of your revelations and your discoveries, and we get to see Brussels in a whole new light and appreciate it on a whole different level than we would have just looking at it with our mundane eyes, just seeing architecture, buses, street furniture. You know what I mean? We're seeing this whole pattern unfold that speaks to us inside. It's a personal kind of journey of growth that the city is sort of encouraging us to go on, I think.
I love it, Scott. I love what you're saying, and this is where it gets really meaningful.
Yeah.
You know, I would love just to ask you a clarification question there. You were speaking about this arch, which is in the place where the unseen Sephiroth the Doth is in the Tree of Life, if I'm understanding it. And then you said this is where you see the belt of Orion rise through the middle arch or something. If I'm just because I haven't read your book, so I'm trying to get my head around these alignments.
And the three stars are kind of vertical when they do their heliacal rise. It's like they're going straight up, right in the middle.
Unbelievable. But then you also said that coincidentally enough, it's also where Sirius is, you said. And is there some kind of directional thing? Because then you said, so you've got Orion, then Sirius does something, and then they point to the polar stars. And then I love that kind of metaphorical or allegorical reference about how those stars never are not shining. So there's like they're eternally bright, which is so symbolic, you know, of eternal life or whatever. So I was kind of catching what you were saying there, but could I ask you to bring me through that one again, please, Ronald?
Yeah, sure. First of all, the actual, let's say, phenomenon of the rising belt stars of Orion. If you are on the equator, Washington is a bit further south than Brussels. You see them, let's say, rising straight, right? If you're further north, then it happens a bit on your side. So the stars drift away a little bit, a bit more in the southern direction. So they are drifting. That means that when you first see the three belt stars of Orion rising, later in time you see the star of Sirius rising. They say also in ancient Egypt that Sirius follows her husband, right? So the stars of Orion rise at a slightly different location. The Mintaka rises exactly in the east, but Sirius is a little bit further to the south, just a little bit further. So that means that if you look at the big boulevard that runs away from the Basilica that is aligned with the rising of Sirius, has a slightly different angle. You see? And in the park, it is located in a way that points due east. Okay, so that's to be precise. Your question was, well, what about the meaning of this? And yeah, that's also what kids say. I want to become a star, an eternal star. Light is also, of course, linked to the philosophical idea of enlightenment, to make sure that we are getting rid of all the things that are not so positive, right? So it's shining a light on what has been a shadow. And so this is also the idea that we have today. But in the ancient Egyptian stellar religion, yeah, the ultimate goal of the pharaoh was to prepare all his life to get to that stage where he could go through that portal and become an eternal star. and shine forever.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that, Ronald. Beautiful. Any chance we can go back to my other question and thicken the plot with that one? We're going to let that one slide. But let's have some fun with that one. Who did it? Why did they do it? What's the story? You know, blah, blah, blah. That whole can of worms.
Well, let me first start with the facts. Okay, so here I am in my curiosity. You know, I read about patterns in architectures, and then I rediscovered that these kind of patterns also exist in the city of Brussels. So that's fact. You can see it, you can look at it, I can demonstrate it, can explain it. If you go on my city tours, you can touch it.
I want to do that, by the way. I'm definitely like, this is, I have no plans to go to Brussels, but now I'm definitely visiting, you know, to do your tour. That's the single reason I'm going.
That would be a very good reason to go, apart from the
Yeah.
chocolate.
Yeah, that too.
Now here we are, and then of course this is not by itself satisfactory, because it doesn't just drop from the sky, not even stars. So it doesn't drop from the sky. The question then, of course, is who did it? And my research has also focused on that. And I said, look, who was the architect, who was the financer, and so forth. And it appeared that in this period between, let's say, the mid 1830s until the early 1900s, there was a continuous, let's say, collaboration between architects, urban planners, sculptors, politicians, the king, King Leopold I, but also his son, King Leopold II, who was nicknamed the Builder King, by the way, bankers, industrialists, and that by itself is not so surprising. But the common element is that to a large extent, not all, but to a large extent, these people were also a member of the Freemasonic fraternity. And the question that I started to ask myself is, okay, so if you know what has been done, if you know who done it, then why did they do this? And it is common knowledge that the Freemasonic community considers Egypt as their philosophical homeland. And so the Egyptian traditions is also partly present in the Masonic belief system. And so this shows that the ancient wisdom that was kept, let's say, in the temples of Egypt and other parts of the world, actually, somehow transitioned throughout time, outside Egypt, but also to Rome and so forth. It moved west. It moved west all across the Atlantic. So there have been people who were initiated in this part of the wisdom traditions, whether they were, let's say, a temple priest in Egypt, or whether they were alchemists, or before that, members of the school of Plato, or Rosicrucians, or whatever you want. And somehow it managed belief system of people who had an influence in shaping a city. And what I have done actually is some additional research that shows also a pattern of all these cities where this is the case. It has always been in a situation where you have an enlightened, even a despotic sometimes, ruler. Somebody who has an enlightened vision, but also has the determination to persevere over this long period of time to make this a reality. You always have a capital. So Brussels, there's a new capital of a new kingdom. What not that many people who read Anglo-Saxon literature know is that, for example, there was a capital in one of the states of Germany, in Baden. There was also a capital called Karlsruhe. This capital is very interesting. It's very interesting to talk about it at another time. But also here we have a ruler who was also an alchemist, was very tolerant. Tolerance is also an important characteristic. You have many people coming together to invest and to shape, and also we're practicing these fraternic, let's say, activities. So here we are in Brussels in that time frame, and at the same time, let's say period, Washington was established. And we know, of course, that Washington, you have George Washington, and I think Scott is much better in position to explain everything that underlies the Washington urban planning.
Yeah,
these commonalities.
There's a truncated pyramid and a lot of symbolism in DC, but in Karlsruhe, there's a truncated pyramid with 32 radiating streets around it. So it's kind of a golden age of urban symbolism.
Yeah, and that city was built in 1715.
So guys, let's say, so there seems to be some kind of logical explanation for the Freemasonic fraternity being heavily involved in, you know, politics, town planning, banking. So it's not a huge stretch to imagine their influence has been infused into these city plans. And I wonder, like, and this goes all the way back through all the cultures you mentioned there, Ronald, and all the way back to Egypt, where there seems to be a deep reverence for the star Sirius, particularly. I seem to think also the 3 stars of Orion's belt. And I take your point that it's like symbolically it represents enlightenment, or, you know, there it has those nice spiritual kind of symbolic messages. But I can't help but feel there must be something more to this obsession with Sirius. The thing that I keep on going back to is just a whole pyramid being aligned to catch that one star in the sky.
Well, like in Newgrange in Ireland, you know, is aligned to Sirius, I believe, and so this is not just a Freemasonic idea. This is really a super ancient idea.
Super ancient.
It's being encoded in these things. And even it's much more modern. There's a whole other layer in Brussels about the European Union and how it's kind of the capital of Europe. And there's a certain level of symbolism there that you've discussed, Ronald, that's fascinating as well. And there's kind of urban alignments that are related to that layer of civilization. That came after the kind of golden age of Freemasonry, let's say between 1700 and 1900. And I find that fascinating that this hasn't just stopped. There's things still going on that are encoded in the city plan and in the architecture. And I wonder if it's also conscious, or if there's some aspects where we end up building things without being aware of them. Just as most people aren't aware of these encodings in the city, were the designers even aware of it? Or are they somehow part of some larger, like, campaign of consciousness to encode these things? What do you think about that, Ronald?
Well, I can let's say respond to this at different levels. Okay, so the first level is, okay, so what is behind this? You have this explanation of the ancient Egyptian stellar religion, but that does not explain necessarily, because this is linked to Orion and Sirius. But what it does not explain is that in Egypt you have more pyramids, you know, mapped out along the River Nile, that mimic a greater part, you know, of the northern and also southern hemispheres. There's literature on this. You can simply see it. Yeah. So
I think Wayne Herschel has done a good
Wayne Herschel. He's done
mapping.
fantastic work.
Yeah.
on that. I think he mapped out about 50 pyramids or so. Only 50 pyramids. I mean, correlating very strongly with stars in the cosmos, and he did it. So Robert Bauval focused on the 3 pyramids in Gizeh, and he did the whole thing. So the chances of coincidence is close to 0. So what Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock actually wrote in their book called Talisman, where they also look at these kind of architectures and try to grasp a little bit the history behind this, is their reference to the ancient pyramid text. There are text inscribed in a wall inside the pyramid in Saqqara. I cannot recall the pharaoh's name at the moment, but there are normally
Djoser, Djoser.
Djoser was of the Step Pyramid.
Yeah,
I think the Pyramid of Unas or so, but I'm not 100%. So forgive me if I'm not entirely precise here. And pyramids normally don't have any graffiti, no scripts, no nothing, no hieroglyphs, but this one has. And part of the text actually points to the holy duty of the pharaoh to build a copy of the perfect sky on earth. So the sky, the cosmos was perfect, the earth was imperfect. And the whole idea behind this, to make a long story short, is that by building a copy of the perfect heaven, there will be, let's say, a positive vibe coming from the cosmos to the earth for the prosperity of the pharaoh's people.
I love that, Ronald.
The duty of the pharaoh.
That was echoed later by the Hermetic idea of as above, so below.
Exactly.
And brought to the European Renaissance, because, and that's kind of where we get it now is we're connecting to this super ancient knowledge through this kind of chain of custody up to the present time.
And these ancient texts talks also about the city, a heavenly city. And in Christianity, we know this as the New Jerusalem. There is this city, coming from the sky, where John the Evangelist had a vision of a city, and it is described in the Bible, including trees of life. And London, with a tree of life design, a tent at the same, was referred to also as Jerusalem on the Thames. So this idea also goes even to the city of Karlsruhe, where the Markgraaf of Baden had a dream. There's even a painting of him, that he had a dream of a city, and he was dreaming of that truncated, let's say, pyramid with a sun with 32 rays, on its apex, and that's the design of the city. So this whole idea also alludes to inspiration and intuition, and it's quite remarkable indeed that I did not read anything about let's say other cities except what I looked at in the context of Brussels. How did it come into being? But I hadn't seen Scott's wonderful documentary, for example. I didn't know this. And
that's
here
incredible.
And here I must also blend in a bit more intuition, because it took me 2 years to write the book, putting all the pieces of the puzzle together, explaining and so forth, and there it is after 2 years. But this has been a journey during which I also had moments that I said, hey, what is happening? We were just talking about this beautiful arcade through which you can see, if you look in eastern direction, the stars of Orion rising. And the other day I was sitting underneath the arch and I was contemplating how would everything fit together? What about this park? Did I overlook anything? And at that moment, a bus driver comes to me with a map in his hand, and he asked me, where is this square? And it was another square that I was actually interested in. So I got a hint very strongly there. and indeed, that square had a meaning, and I started to pick up on it and also describe it. And this other square is linked with the Taurus constellation. So here, there is something that I call synchronicity is at work. Those of you who are familiar with the work of Carl Jung, who has written a lot about synchronicity and our common, let's say, unconsciousness, also our collective unconsciousness, that there's a lot of, let's say, wisdom that we are not aware of, and intuition that comes to the surface. And that's a bit, on a very personal note, what I experienced on a couple of moments there. And then you come to the same conclusions, and then there is a fantastic sacred geometry academy, and then we are suddenly in a podcast, so it can happen.
That's amazing, Ronald, and thank you for sharing the personal side of it, because I feel, I really feel those components of your sharing when you're explaining that you're under the arch and some random bus driver comes up and pulls out a map, and then that becomes a meaningful part of your journey. I have experienced myself that when I work with geometry and geometric archetypes, I have really witnessed a very amplified sense of coincidences and a kind of a mirroring of what's going on in my internal psychic world, kind of like literally flashing up straight in front of me in material reality, which is just that whole Jungian synchronistic thing, the blending of mind and matter he talks about, And I'm to be honest, I'm so far downstream with this sacred geometry stuff now that for me, this is just an innate part of working with geometry, that coincidences seem to get amplified. And so would I be right in saying that's been very much part of your journey with this work, like since you started it?
Actually, yes. And that has to do with not just a piece of knowledge, but it then also comes with the experience. As you explain yourself at a certain moment, you think, what is this? And then you try to understand, but sometimes it's the other way around. You read about it, so that's what it is, and you become more conscious of it. And in my case, I have concluded basically that if I hadn't tuned in, it probably would not have manifested.
Yeah.
So I was tuned in, I was on this track, and suddenly, you call it consciousness, of which I feel we are all part. It starts to play ball with us. Because this whole, let's say, way of building cities, of course, cannot just happen without the manual labor that you put in, the design, the ideas, and it has to be put into matter, right? But at the same time, there is something that links this together, like a kind of an invisible field of consciousness.
Sorry, Ronald, you broke up there. Did you say the stars begin to play ball with us? Is that what you said there?
I say this higher level of consciousness or so, or the cosmos, whatever you want to call it, starts to interact.
Yeah.
Because I got hints, So, but this is a very personal, let's say, interpretation. But I've noticed this too frequently to say this is coincidence.
Yeah, well, I feel exactly the same.
I see it as kind of an urban alchemy. When you get your mind into the city plan and you understand these secrets in plain sight, it really is an allegory for you to level up your consciousness, to progress on your own journey. And I think that was the goal of a medieval alchemy, was to transmute not just lead into gold, but to transmute the kind of dross of your soul into something finer and more refined and more leveled up.
You feel like that too, Scott, don't you?
Definitely. I think that the more I work with geometry, the more it kind of subtly upgrades me. And it's hard to articulate. but I recognize that this is happening. And
Mhm.
yeah, and you can look out in the world and find these patterns, but you can also draw them on paper and go
Yeah.
inward with the same patterns. And it kind of is a vehicle for consciousness to connect with higher or deeper realms of existence of the psyche.
Mm.
And I find it very amazing, and I recommend it, but it's not really for everyone. You kind of have to come to it on your own accord, and then there's this huge kind of journey you can go on.
Mm.
Just like every hero gets called to adventure, but they might not necessarily respond to that call until they're ready,
Mhm.
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
then they have to go on the journey.
Mhm.
Yeah.
In that connection, I just wanted to remind us that this hermetic principle, as above, so below, is only part of it, because it goes as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. And I think
Mm.
that is exactly what Scott is explaining here.
Mm. Yeah, and I know, Scott, I mean, I know you so well now that I know you've had many coincidences and many experiences with, your numbers and, seeing those manifest. And, do you have any you've had a good experience of like coincidences occurring, and would you attribute some of that to the work you've done with geometry?
Yeah, I think that geometry is just a vehicle. So the deeper, the farther you go with that vehicle, sometimes coincidences will start to occur like fast and furious. And
Yeah.
I think it's a signaling mechanism from a higher domain to indicate to you that you're on the right path and to give you sort of encouragement where the exterior world is starting to mirror your interior states
Mm-hmm.
and vice versa. I guess there's an interplay there. We're kind of co-creators of that. And
Exactly.
and you just come into resonance with the world around you, and everything, it sort of becomes alive and full of intention and wisdom, and you start to, I don't know, it's just amazing. So
And there's something about that, that aha moment, because let's be honest, coincidences and synchronicities, they're deeply subjective and deeply personal, right? But in your heart when you feel one that has meaning. Like I've had a few that have like bowled me over so much. They've been so powerful. I've needed to lie down. Like simple stuff like I was thinking about the golden ratio and dodecahedrons, and then I saw it on a window in front of me. Like these, but that kind of goes like, oh yeah, Geoff, that's kind of cute, whatever. But it's almost the feeling of this overwhelming charge of like, this is significant. I almost feel it land like in my heart it's like this endorsement of what's going on. I mean, I haven't really worked it out much more than that. I feel similar to you, Scott. It seems like you've opened to that, Ronald, as well, that side of it. Um, and like I have no answer. It's like a mystery to me. But it's a wonderful mystery, and one that I really cherish having the opportunity to explore, and can kind of recommend it more highly, I suppose. Get into geometry, folks. The rabbit hole goes deep.
well, I think this is a good place to conclude our talk today, and I just want to thank you so much, Ronald, for joining us and
Yeah.
enlightening us with the Brussels Da Vinci Code. I think I really recommend everybody read this book and tune in to the patterns that are all around us, as a vehicle for inner exploration.
And before we get cut off, I was just going to say, Ronald, have you got anywhere people could go so that they could see your work and maybe attend your tours? Where would be a good place to connect with you on the web?
Well, I have a website, www.brusselsdavincicode in one word, .eu. And there you'll find all the information about the book, the walks, and lectures. So I think that's a good place to land. And you can also contact me via the website, and I'll be happy to hear from you.
Amazing. Well, I want to do one of those tours. Sign me up. I'm on my way.
Got you, Geoff. Looking forward.
Aha.
But there is always an open door for you too, be it a little bit further away from Brussels. But should you be around on your trip,
I would love
don't
to.
hesitate.
Yeah, that's on my
Your
bucket
next
list.
European tour, Scott.
Yeah, exactly.